Thank you for having me here. I'm really glad to be here up at Columbia. So this is going to be kind of just a whistle-stop tour through a lot of work that my group has been doing on the web. It's going to be fairly conversational, so feel free to interrupt with a question. We'll also have time, hopefully, at the end to banter about this stuff. So I will just begin. Just a little background about me. So I don't have a library background. I actually I'm sort of sometimes describe myself as a kind of a liberal arts refugee. I was sort of drifting around after college and ended up fortuitously intersecting with a gentleman by the name of Bob Stein, who some of you may or may not have heard of. Bob is a very brilliant kind of multimedia publisher, and during a brief brilliant moment in the 90s, ran a company called Voyager, which was a CD-ROM publisher, and published a pretty dazzling array of titles that were really pushing the boundaries of the computer as kind of a narrative medium, as a very user-driven kind of multimedia kind of experience. And there was a brief moment where the CD-ROM was kind of a saleable unit, and there was kind of a business model for this new kind of publishing. Then the web really kind of started to blow up, and that all kind of went away. But Bob continued to kind of pioneer a number of different kind of publishing tools, and eventually formed this institute called the Institute for the Future of the Book. And this is our blog. And I sort of happily kind of stumbled into this as it was getting off the ground, and it served for me as a kind of an alt graduate training in new media and kind of information theory, sort of through thinking aloud, sometimes blundering in public on this blog, kind of thinking through a wide range of issues at the intersection of the future of reading, writing, and publishing. And working in the blog medium as a kind of our main kind of window into our thinkings and doings, was really ended up being a kind of a pivotal, defining element of our work. Blogs were kind of a big thing. This was sort of a 2004, 2008-ish. So blogs were kind of the social media that everyone was talking about. And we were observing some interesting kind of mutations of our kind of received notions of authorship, seeing single-authored or kind of small group-authored blogs, but with readers in close proximity, kind of filling out writing in the comment streams, and started to think of writing as more of this extended performance rather than discrete kind of finished products. And so we started to think about how that was maybe kind of suggesting longer-term changes in the way we think about writing and authorship. And we even started noticing some bloggers working on books in public, kind of sort of a cross between an open writer's diary and kind of a savvy marketing, kind of pre-marketing kind of strategy, and sort of but benefiting from kind of early response from kind of an inner core of readers and subject specialists and people who were kind of passionate for one reason or another about the topic, and started to see how this kind of collective authorship was sort of kind of merging, kind of hybridizing with more solo kind of ideas of authorship. So this led to a number of experiments. I'll just give you a quick glimpse at one. This is a professor at the New School, Mackenzie Wark, a media theorist, and who was writing a kind of a manuscript, kind of an academic monograph on video games, single-player video games, kind of a critical theory of video games. And we worked with Mackenzie at a late stage of his writing when he had a full draft of this manuscript, but it was not yet published and didn't even have a publisher yet at that time. And we built a kind of a full networked edition of the text, which was written in kind of a very hyper-structured way, so we were able to design around its very regular, predictable structure, almost looking kind of like a stack of cards. And we invited readers to comment on every paragraph, which were arranged in neat stacks of five stacks of 5 per chapter, 9 chapters. And this was just a hack of the kind of popular blog platform WordPress, where we just sort of took the comment stream, which usually goes right below a post, and sort of establishes kind of a hierarchy. The author wrote this, and now you can sort of, below the fold, as it were, kind of comment and respond and fill out the idea. We just sort of subtly, or not so subtly, subverted that hierarchy by putting the comments to the side. And it kind of, evoked something very, very old in reading, which is kind of marginalia and kind of margin commentary, except here, in a public website, suddenly that's a public margin. So this was a kind of an interesting kind of mashup experiment. We did a number of variations on this kind of idea of situating the comments in close proximity to the text. So not tearing down the author, not kind of obliterating them into a kind of a mass of of fragments, but kind of putting them in much closer proximity to the response and the kind of critical ferment around it. And that ended up getting published by Harvard University Press, and there was an interesting variation on the kind of the traditional endnotes section, where there were kind of an intermixing of his scholarly endnotes and selected comments from this website. And he participated in this website, and it was sort of an event over a few months where he was there really inviting and soliciting feedback that ranged from real kind of philosophical wrestling matches to typo spotting. It was a really kind of interesting, fertile experiment, both for its successes and failures. And so that's the kind of work we were doing, just to give you a sense of where I was coming from. This work then ended up kind of getting picked up in different library circles, and I ended up kind of, over time, getting invited to kind of random regional library conferences as the kind of oddball, kind of talk about the future speaker. And I would just sort of talk about these kind of crazy experiments we were doing. And eventually that led me into kind of more library circles, and eventually met a guy named Josh Greenberg who was starting a new team at the library, and that's how I ended up at the library. So in retrospect, it all there's a kind of a sequence that makes some logical sense to me looking back, but as it was happening, I really had no idea where I was heading. So it's an interesting story, at least to me. So this is where I work now, and specifically here, which is kind of astonishing to me. Specifically here, there's a formerly open-air courtyard, the South Court it's called, on the south side of the building. And because the building is super landmarked and even the internal facades are protected, to build an extension, they essentially inserted a free-floating building that's just joined by kind of a thin layer of skylight around the top. And the consequence of that is actually the floors lightly bounce. It's kind of unnerving. But it's a lovely kind of old, new, kind of inside-outside space. It kind of feels sort of weirdly fitting to our work. Sort of like a bit of extra memory inserted into the mainframe. So that's where we work, and that's on 42nd Street. And this is, the famous reading room above the stacks. It's an interesting kind of hybrid organization, very unusual. I don't know of another library kind of organization that is quite like this, in that we serve 3 of the boroughs of New York City. Queens and Brooklyn, of course, were separate cities until about 100 years ago. They have their own library systems. We work closely with them, but they are separate systems. But we have 88 circulating libraries in these 3 boroughs, and these are what you think of as municipal kind of on the ground front lines kind of neighborhood libraries doing great work in the neighborhoods. We also have 4 research centers, which are much more on par with kind of leading academic research libraries, except for the fact that there's no student body per se, there's no faculty. They are public research libraries. It's a really kind of interesting notion. And if you think about, if you really go through your head, how much indoor public space is there? That is really in no way commercial, is not a transportation kind of structure. There's really very little indoor public space. And this is and having an indoor public space that is dedicated to research and has collections on this kind of scale is really kind of a special thing. So every day I kind of checking in with that fact. So we have 4 research centers. The 42nd Street building, the Stephen A. Schwartzman building it's now called, is really dedicated to the humanities and social sciences. It has our general research stacks, and then kind of a mosaic of special collections, rare manuscript materials, all kinds of things, prints, photographs. It's amazing. Performing Arts Library is up in the Lincoln Center complex, I think really the leading library of its kind. The Schomburg Center up in Harlem is devoted to Black culture and African diaspora. And we have the Science, Business, and Industry Library on 34th and Madison, which has over time, in recent years, become more of a kind of a local entrepreneurship, kind of business bootstrapping center, financial literacy, job search. But it has incredible access to kind of industry databases that would be, that an individual can't afford to subscribe to. So great resources there. So we are this strange new unit, New York Public Library Labs, NYPL Labs. This is the group so far. Trevor Thornton there is a little shy, so he has an avatar there. We're unfortunately just a group of guys. We would like that to change, but they're good guys, so I like working with them a lot. So it's made up of me, and then 3, soon to be 4, actually starting Monday, developers. And then Dave there in the bottom left is kind of the product manager, essentially jack of all trades, my right-hand man, kind of spanning everything. And so this is the core unit. But we work very, very closely, and this is, I think, a defining thing about us that's different from other technology shops and libraries. We work very, very closely with curators, not just as sort of a service unit, like, what do you need built, but really as collaborators and co-conceivers of projects. And I think this is kind of why the work has kind of unfolded in the way it has, which I'm about to get into. that we don't kind of think of things in a vacuum, and we also don't see ourselves as just kind of like a passive kind of just not to say that other modes are passive, but we're not sort of waiting for requests. We're actually actively going out there into the collections, getting into deep kind of sometimes very philosophical conversations with the curators, learning about the collections, learning about problems that need to be solved, learning about interesting kind of elements of the collections that might make for a good experiment that could shed light on new ways of thinking about the library that could potentially, hopefully, eventually scale out. So we're sort of always trying to reimagine the library as, and these are some of the themes that we're kind of returning to a lot, reimagining the library as really part of the internet. Not just a library that has physical collections and then has good web resources to help you find them or navigate them or guide you to them, or even some representations of them online, but an internet library that is part of the internet, where the stuff that we put out there really is woven into the internet. It's in the digital medium in ways that you can use, repurpose, analyze, really work with digitally. Really, and that kind of leads to thinking of the library as a data clearinghouse, not thinking about it as any one particular type of storage medium or kind of one particular format of knowledge, but really as data, and how do we provide access to that data in new ways. And the library, the public library, as a public platform, which of course it's always been in a sense, but thinking of more kind of technological senses of the word platform, something that you can build upon, that you can tap into programmatically, that you can build extensions to or help build the core of. So our work, or at least the story I'll start to tell today, and our work is sort of, we're actually at an interesting point where I feel like we've come to the end of our first chapter and a new chapter is beginning, and I'll show some glimmerings of that toward the end. But the story I'm going to tell today really is best situated in the context of earlier work the library had done that we were not directly involved with, of kind of really starting to get online, starting to get digital. And this was took a lot of forms, but it was mostly about just improving discovery and access to collections online. Now, of course, it's inevitably going to be just scratching the surface because we have truly profound amount of information at the library. But the first really big, kind of larger scale incursion into the web that the library made was in 2005 when it launched the NYPL Digital Gallery. This is before I was there. I came there. I arrived at around 2008. So in 2005, this launched. It's had a few redesigns, but it's essentially the same thing that launched that day with more content kind of flowing in all the time. This is now provides access to over 800,000 digital images, all scanned from our research collections. Back in 2005, they made the calculation, and I think it was probably a smart one, that they were going to focus on visual material. The web was not really well equipped. It was only just become well equipped to audiovisual material, and we don't have a lot because of rights and statutory reasons that we could share as easily. We decided not to focus on digitized books. We were getting into the Google partnership and starting to figure out that. But for this kind of public access portal, stuff that you can access and use, we focused on images. And so hence the digital gallery. And it's a really terrific site. Its kind of functionality is a little outdated. It doesn't have some of the things you would expect, some of the personalized kind of functionality you'd expect now, but it's great. It provides access to 800,000 plus images in small and medium sizes. There are folks in the library who are pushing to kind of release more because we think that's ultimately really the point. But it's terrific, and you can embed stuff, and you can just download it and use it, and good things have happened as a result. And some of it's kind of organized into collection guides and so on and so forth. So this is kind of what we were looking at when we were getting our group set up. And we were partly looking at this because, of course, there are millions of other things we could look to digitize and new things to do, but we were actually interested in what was already there and how you could go deeper with that. So we were kind of asking the question, so you digitize some stuff, great, it's more accessible, but now what? How do you actually make this stuff useful, part of the internet, useful for research, get new kinds of data out of it? So that's some of the thinking that was guiding our first experiments. And we were thinking about this this is a graphic from Clay Shirky's oft-quoted Cognitive Surplus book, which is just basically distilling the idea that we have a lot of spare cognitive time that we're not, between the times that we're working or sleeping, there's about a third of our cognitive kind of time that is kind of up for grabs potentially. And a lot of it is spent watching television or kind of consuming media. And this is just a kind of a provocative infographic showing the 200 billion hours per year spent by adults watching TV in the US compared to the 100 million hours it's estimated, at least when this graphic was made, it took to create all of Wikipedia. So that's kind of put something in perspective, that we have a lot of time that we're spending on a lot of things. If we even funneled a fraction of it toward other endeavors that are now made newly facilitated by networked communication and distributed tools on the internet, we might get some stuff done. So we were kind of taking a page from Wikipedia and thinking about Wikipedia kind of as a peer, building public knowledge resources on the web, unrestricted, uncommercial, just there. So that's something that was guiding our thinking. You know, why couldn't the public library be in that space? Not just sort of dipping its toes into it, but just that could be what the public library is. So we looked around, and there's a lot of this already going on in the kind of cultural heritage space and elsewhere. So libraries and museums were starting to explore crowdsourcing to kind of improve and augment resources that they were digitizing and putting out in public. The National Library of Australia had digitized its entire newspaper archive. And you can get some okay automatic text kind of extraction from there that can aid search, but the quality is low. A lot of this stuff is from microfilm, it degrades, there's kind of copies of copies of copies kind of situations going on. So you need to fix that text. You're talking about millions, hundreds of millions of lines of text, not something the library has the capacity to do. So they invited people to come in and volunteer their time on the web and to fix lines of text. And tens of millions of lines have been corrected just by unpaid volunteers who want this resource to be better accessible. And it's in the process actually driven more attention and raised awareness of the archive. So has kind of a bunch of kind of benefits. Victoria and Albert Museum it's laborious actually getting just the right crop for its image gallery. So they have auto crops that users then can select from to kind of identify the best ones. So they're kind of helping people use exercise a little bit of aesthetic judgment on how to kind of process these images and get them into their gallery. In the Academy, you see kind of transcription projects for handwritten documents that are not easy to provide kind of full text access to digitally because they really need to be deciphered by an eye and a hand. And getting kind of collaborative groups together to kind of go through boxes of letters. This is the Jeremy Bentham papers in London, old kind of civic documents and government documents of the U.S. From U.S. history. We even see this in newspapers. The Guardian had a great suspected that there were good stories and scandals in a pile of MPs' expense receipts. But you know, they don't have the time to devote all their newsroom resources to sifting through that. So they said, we'll just quickly digitize them, throw them online, build a quick, very intuitive interface where you can sort of sort them and flag things of interest. And indeed, they did find some inappropriate use of the public treasury. And so that's the MP expenses scandal project. And then genealogy is always sort of at kind of ahead of the curve a little bit in kind of mobilizing effort on the internet and building good tools. And organizations like Family Search or for-profit companies like Ancestry get a lot of labor out of volunteers who just want more of these documents to be accessible. So they have interfaces for keying, you know, civic records, birth, death, marriage certificates, all that kind of stuff. That kind of raw material that you can, once actually made digitally accessible, really helps you navigate family histories. So they're getting a lot of great work out of volunteers who want to see this resource built. Citizen science is kind of on another level, especially through the efforts of Zooniverse project, which is based at the Adler Planetarium. At least the web development of it is Adler Planetarium in Chicago, but also involved with the Citizen Science Alliance in Oxford. And this is just a suite of ever-expanding citizen science projects that are the result of groups of scientists actually having a data set that they, you know, basically there's a problem with the data. There's something that needs to be gone through by hand or by kind of an informed eye that they don't have the time or resources to do. And if they could just put it into a platform where a lot of amateur scientists or professional scientists could look at it and sift according to some structured tasks and clearly defined kind of goals, they could actually make this data set actionable and analyzable. And so they have volunteers classifying galaxies from Hubble data. They've created an entire historical climate data set from the Royal Navy's ship's logs. They now have a project that just launched where you're kind of following bat migration patterns or something like this. Just amazing, mind-blowing stuff. And also, again, looking into that peer group on the internet, these kind of very public-spirited internet cultural organizations like the Internet Archive or the Archive Team, rogue archivists, kind of wandering, self-appointed kind of digital archivists who are kind of rescuing things like GeoCities as Yahoo shuts down the servers, or migrating old computer magazines and material that is not yet considered valuable enough to save, but would be a tragedy to lose 50 plus, on down the line, 50 years plus down the line. So really looking at these kind of these new breeds of kind of librarians and archivists that are wandering around the internet, not necessarily to varying degrees of kind of approval. And so let's go inside what we're talking about now. This is sort of a controversial image because this is all about to go away, as you've probably been following. But let's remember it now, and we can maybe make a Donkey Kong game out of it. So the first project I want to go into, and tying back what I was saying about the digital gallery, this kind of first big step the library took into just putting stuff online. These next three projects I'm going to talk about, we're all dealing with materials that were already there, that actually were already digitized to a significant extent, were already accessible. So these are all about like the so now what kind of question. So this is our map division at the 42nd Street Library. It's a wonderful place. And this is, I mentioned the curatorial characters who you're going to meet. This is Matt Knudsen. That is actually his title, Geospatial Librarian. He's got the coolest title of anyone in the library. And here he is working with a group of visitors or students, spreading out map sheets on the tables. And for a long time, that was the only way you could get at the maps. They started digitizing some of them, and you could see them in the digital gallery. But on the digital gallery, it's good. It's better that it's great that you don't have to go in just to see this. That's terrific. But they're not really usable the way that we use maps now. We think of maps like this. This is where the Brooklyn Bridge is now coming in, the City Hall Park. And we work with them like this. They're actually these kind of seamless spatial canvases that we can kind of pan and zoom across and then access lots of data through them, data that has a connection to that place. And we have all that. If you think of the kind of historical equivalent, we have a lot of that data, the data that you would want to access via map, data that is relevant to that time and place. The time dimension is what's tricky. So we wanted to be able to work with the maps in that way, the old maps, kind of build kind of a time machine in a sense. So hopefully this will work. It should work because it's on my computer. There we go. So this is taken from a rather sluggish web tutorial we have up. It's not actually called the Map Warper, so this is a little outdated, but this will give you an idea of what you can do on the Map Warper. Basically, it's a tool for converting old maps into actual geospatial data. And with old New York City street atlases, which are the focus of this, it actually works really, really well because we have atlases produced by insurance companies, real estate companies. These were highly accurate maps with incredibly fine-grained data about the built environment of New York City. And so through this process that's called georectification or map warping or rubber sheeting, you can identify points on the old map that match points on the new map. And when you get enough of them there, kind of these kind of control points, you can slammo, basically merge them. And then every pixel on that old map image that was digitized will correspond to a point on the Earth, a latitude, longitude, coordinate on the Earth. And it's vectorized, and it suddenly is endowed with the ability, with the functionality of a Google map, or it can be mobilized in that way. So this is kind of showing how an old map of the Central Park is kind of being used in the Map Warper. And this is something that is available for the public to do. You can sign up an account, watch this tutorial, or come in and do an on-site workshop, which is really the best way to get to learn it because it's a little complicated. It's not like you don't pick it up instantly. But then you can do some cropping so that you can start to take these individual atlas sheets that were for many centuries, for lack of any better method, were stored in codexes, were stored in book form. And we had to come up with all kinds of innovations like arrows that led off the side of pages that showed you, go to skip ahead 30 plates and then that will connect to this. And we really had to kind of twist our mind in pretzels just to kind of understand how to look at geography in book form. And we came up with some good solutions. But now we can essentially, all this data, just as I'm cued by the demo here, is exportable as KML files and other formats that can be visualized in Google Earth. You don't need to be a GIS expert. You can just download it from the site, download Google Earth, and then open up the file, and it'll become a layer, in an asset layer in your Google Earth. So there you see the old Central Park over the new Central Park. So that's what we're doing. And then you start to unbind these atlases and stitch them together into layers, and you're essentially taking the maps out of the books and laying them out on the geography they describe. So this is an 1854 street atlas, goes up to 42nd Street, Manhattan, and it's really kind of laid out like a quilt on Manhattan Island. And that whole layer can be exported and seen in Google Earth, just sort of overlaying it. So it's pretty cool already. But this is really just the first step, for basically kind of laying the groundwork, as it were, where you can start to then maybe turn this into a discovery tool. You can start to geo-reference other collections, kind of essentially check them in to a time and place that could then be kind of summoned by a map-based interface. They're also going in, there's tools on the Map Warper to trace individual features from the maps, predominantly in the case of these New York City houses, building footprints. There's a lot of data on these maps that you don't get just by putting them under cameras in the digitization lab. All these footprints correspond to color keys in the maps that tell you what these colors mean. You know, that this is what the building was used for, how high it was, what the materials it was made of, and then there's other attributes on the map like addresses and named landmarks and so on and so forth. So we're building incredibly fine-grained, obsessively fine-grained data out of these maps that can then kind of exist independently of them, but has clear attestation back to source material. So we're building a new kind of library resource that is kind of genuinely new, but connected to older resources. So we're kind of remediating the collection and then kind of creating new data out of it. And that can eventually, this is just kind of mock-up, proof of concept, can overlay, and you can start to do some interesting comparison on, because geography changes a lot, and you can start to see, model in 3D based on that data. We know these were yay high, made of brick, et cetera. And then where it really starts to get fun, mashing up other kinds of data with them. So what I'm showing here is that 1854 street map. And we're loading in a spreadsheet that actually a staff member, or an intern rather, basically transcribed from some city directories, trying to kind of compile, identify black New Yorkers through New York's history using old city directories. These ephemeral documents, these things that were kind of had use for about a year and then were usually tossed, but the library saved, are really rich in data. And so here, using Google Fusion tables, we've kind of created a spreadsheet of these names with addresses and professions, and then thrown them into Google Earth, and we're starting to mash up data using that kind of map resource. That doesn't always work. A lot of the addresses don't exist anymore, or they're in different places. So this has identified to us kind of a as yet untackled, or not untackled, but unsolved problem of how do you georeference, how do you drop pins on maps in time? Like how do you place pins accurately in time? Because the geography has changed, things aren't called by the same names, boundaries have shifted. So this has led to an ancillary project that we've gotten a small grant from the NEH to start building, which we're calling NYC Chronology of Place, which is essentially a gazetteer project. Gazetteers used to be dictionaries of places, essentially. They were alphabetical dictionaries of place names, and there would be a little entry for each one. It was kind of an encyclopedia of locations. Gazetteers now are kind of services by which you can kind of put in an address or a name or a kind of geographic entity, and it'll know where to put it, and it'll tell you stuff about it. So we want to build one of those for New York, but historical New York, so that you can start to kind of drop pins accurately in time and use that as kind of a service to kind of consult against. And a lot of that's going to start with data harvested out of these maps and out of this project. So that's really in the kind of prototyping, not even. We're starting to prototype that and work with an amazing group of kind of open source geohackers on that project and on the Map Warper. They're called Topomancy, which is a pretty nerdy name. They're like geo wizards. And they work also on the OpenStreetMap project, which is the base of the Map Warper. That's OpenStreetMap with some added kind of city data added in. So we're trying to be open source through and through where we can. And the Map Warper is, here's some quick stats, which I think need to be updated. But this is conservative estimates of where we're at so far. Modest number of participants, This is kind of a high-touch project, not for the faint of heart. But we've gotten a lot done with volunteer labor. And as you often find with these small-scale kind of transcription projects, there's often like a couple people who do a lot of work, who get kind of deeply obsessed and are wonderfully crazy to your benefit. And so there's like one guy who warped over 300 maps from Brooklyn and kind of almost single-handedly did a whole atlas. The bottleneck for us is not the map warping so much as the building tracing, all that stuff. So we're actually looking into some ways to make that easier and more fun. Maybe kind of, who knows, turn it into some kind of like Monopoly kind of game where you're kind of unlocking old haunted buildings of New York, and who knows. We're thinking about some stuff. Actually, I'll show you a little peek at some of that at the end. The code is open source. It's available. So any of you who want to get a Map Warper running in your own shop, it's there. And we'd be happy to answer some questions. So the next project, again, dealing with content that had already been digitized to a significant extent at the library, was already accessible. You can already look at it on a web page. it concerns a collection of an amazing art, and this testifies to the New York Public Library's amazing, voracious collecting over the years. We have Virginia Woolf and Nabokov manuscripts and Whitman and Twain and all this kind of amazing stuff. Gutenberg Bible, cuneiform tablets. We also have crazy kind of what were thought of as kind of forgettable or ephemeral kind of documents, like old restaurant menus in this case. 45,000 of them approximately, going back into the I think 1840s. Really the origins of public dining culture as we know it. The strengths are in New York, especially around the late 19th, early 20th century, but we have them up to this day. We have really eerie menus from Windows on the World and the World Trade Center, Concord kind of in-flight menus, a lot of just really amazing, diverse archive, but definitely with a strength in New York. And so here's kind of a goofy picture of our curatorial kind of core collaborators here. We have Michael Inman, who's a curator of rare books where the collection resides, and Rebecca Fetterman, who's an amazing kind of trove of information and knowledge of culinary history, and writes a popular blog called Cooked Books, and is sort of our resident culinary expert and culinary collections expert. So sort of the main steward of the menu collection. And that's me, kind of posing as someone who knows something about it, with a Russian tea room menu. So they were originally collected by this wonderfully mad woman, Miriam Botolph, who kind of collected them on behalf of the library. She wasn't even an employee. She just sort of said, I'm going to do this, and you're going to accept them. And we said, okay. And she just collected tens of thousands of these menus and wrote, placed ads in hotel professional magazines and being like, you must save these. They may be important someday. And I don't know we don't know that much about her. I just would love to know. I would love to hear her distilled explanation of why she suspected these would be so interesting. They definitely are. It's a hunch that has been borne out, but I just wonder what went through her mind. But so these are just, she would always put a stamp right in the middle of them. It just breaks our hearts. Like she loved them. We wouldn't have this collection if not for her, but she would just kind of go to them and be like, just like stamp them right in the middle. But better than not having them at all, right? So, they're from rail companies, shipping lines. A lot of what we call testimonial menus, which are from a specific event. Banquet, which have not only culinary information, but these incredible log rolls of people who attended them, signatures, strange, arcane, little sing-along kind of texts, and goofy, kind of comedic, satirical menus, weird stuff. Kind of really iconic stuff from the kind of the rail lines. And they all live under the park. In our extension storage under the stacks, which will continue and will be expanded, in fact, as part of our big kind of library kind of reconstruction. And there they are. They're organized in boxes by date. And that's for a long time the only way you could access the menus. You could just be like, show me menus from 1904. And someone would go down there and bring them up to the rare books, the special collections reading room, and you'd look at some menus. Pretty good. They created some lists where you could access them by date. Then they had some volunteers got involved about 10-ish years ago and started kind of coming in on site with some laptops, some chunky old laptops, and we're creating some item records for individual menus. And so that really expanded the data we had on them. They were not, unfortunately, kept in the most consistent ways, so the data has proved very difficult to work with. So we've learned some lessons about legacy data. I'm sure see some familiar nodding going on. But it did really increase access to the collection, and so then there was this kind of rudimentary database online where you could consult, and you could put in a restaurant's name, say, or put in a year, and you could get some results. Then about a quarter of the collection was digitized and put in the digital gallery, and it's great. You could suddenly see these right there. But the problem is people wanted to kind of get into the food. They wanted to ask questions of these menus. I want to see how this dish evolved over time, or I want to look at price fluctuations of something. And there had been some actually very serious researchers coming in looking for this. Sometimes you'd have a novelist saying, I just want to know what a cup of coffee would have been at a place like this in 1910 or whatever, and getting some period detail. We at one point had a marine biologist from Texas A&M who was coming in and poring over thousands of New York restaurant menus from turn of the century period, looking at fish prices and trying to extrapolate kind of infer information about the populations of the fish by the price fluctuations. So people were kind of wanting to kind of do some data mining of this collection, but we really didn't have good data. We had at best these little item records. And if you went into the digital gallery and typed oyster, you would not get menus. You would get kind of maps of Oyster Bay, pictures. You drill down a few pages and you would get a menu now and then. And the menus you'd get because there was something notable about that menu that included that name. So an oyster house is in the name of the establishment. So again, this shows the limitations of the data we had. So we thought, we want to get this data. We want to get it out somehow. We really considered OCR, optical character recognition. And we probably could have gotten some decent output from a lot of the menus. But a lot of them are handwritten or have weird typography. And we also wanted to we didn't want to just get flows of text. We wanted to get structured data that we could query programmatically, and where each dish could have an instance and be tracked across the collection. These are basically, it's basically software that it's been trained to recognize the shapes of letters optically, and then can convert those into machine-readable text. But it doesn't, it's rarely perfect, and depending on the quality of the material and the nature of the font, you'll get varying results. But going back to that newspaper project in Australia, that's what the volunteers were correcting. They got some real machine-readable text. You could copy and paste it, but it was full of errors. There were weird characters in it. So you'd go there and look at the original, look at the output, and correct it. So we figured we also wanted to get a structured data set where every dish had its own ID and could be tracked, and you could see the prices fluctuate. So we said, if ideally you would have people transcribe this by hand, that would produce the highest quality data set. But clearly we don't have resources to do that. But building on what we learned from the map Borbor, which had a crowdsourcing element, but was not kind of in the foreground. It was like, if you want to participate, we would love to have you. What if we created a site that really put crowdsourcing in the foreground, saying like, to get this done, we need you, let's do it together. So we decided to transcribe, and thus was born this site. It was a little more humble when we launched it. This is a redesigned version. It's called What's on the Menu. And it's exactly what we're trying to find out. And so we've had people transcribing this. You don't need to register. You don't even have the option to register. You just do it anonymously and as little or as much as you want, one dish at a time. And we've built up quite a data set. This is from maybe a week or two ago, so well over 1 million dishes. Was that? People did it. Yeah, we had a hunch that, because we're a public library, we're not like some for-profit kind of, kind of document delivery service is like, hey, help us, and then you can buy back access to it. We're public; it's yours essentially. And we, and because we had a specific idea in mind what we could create out of it, and I think because people just go nuts for anything related to food, it was a really good candidate for kind of a popular kind of featured kind of initiative, and it's won a lot of prizes. It's really gotten kind of recognized as kind of a pioneering effort. We're very honored to what you can do kind of going deep into collection and how you can mobilize the public's effort in a public library, kind of public memory context. And let's see if this works. Oh, this should engage. Come on. Oh well. Anyway, the point is, you get you find a menu that needs to be transcribed, and you click on an individual dish, and then just type what you see. That's how it works, and you capture the price. If we have one, in this case, no, and it instantly becomes part of the database. And then you can start to explore what's been created through searching or through clicking individual dishes off the sides of the menus. All those are hyperlinks. So this is just a search for potatoes Saratoga. You get some menu results that have Saratoga in the name, that have potatoes. We've really kind of dramatically improved the search in the relaunch we did back in this June. And this launched in April 2011. You also get results from this growing data set, pretty much real time. The data, you see a lot of similar instances. They haven't been kind of reconciled and clustered yet, so it's pretty early on in what we can do with the data. But we provided some tools for kind of an analytics dashboard where you can take the 20 most similar terms and start to kind of cluster them a little bit yourself, and it'll update the data live. That visualization on the left is a placement map where, in terms of XY coordinates, they tend to appear on the menu, which sometimes actually can tell you something. It tends to be the beginning of the meal, it tends to be the end of the meal. Meal order is an aspect of the culinary experience. but sometimes it's just like a big mess. You can also kind of plug the term into searches. So you can hit a Google Images search that will automatically plug in that term, and you realize, oh, that was an old name for potato chips. So you can learn things just by interacting with the collection, taking an individual piece of data out of an ephemeral collection and starting to kind of really mobilize its data. We link to recipe searches. It's kind of fake linked data. For those of you who are following the linked data kind of thing. There's just like dummy search terms plopped into external search engines. But we'd like to eventually get the data set so it kind of links ontologically to other things. Anyway, I'm getting into library nerddom. But so that's the menu project, and we're really trying to kind of model, how you can weave a collection into the internet in a new way. And when we look at the long tail of kind of web traffic into the site, the high-level terms are what you'd expect, like menu project, transcribe menus, library, or stuff like historical menus. But you get down the long tail of like what have people searched that led them to this site. And there's all kinds of obscure dishes, old hotel names, and people are finding it because of that, because we've actually got that data out there. So this is a quick kind of stat check. Again, we're not talking like gajillions of users. We're talking about in the tens of thousands. But if you look at the number of unique visitors and then the number of page views, the engagement kind of metrics are pretty amazing. People spend a lot of time on the site, or at least the way it averages out suggests that there's people who drop by, people who do a little, and then there's some people who do insane amounts. And we know through just sort of informal means that there are some people who are deeply, deeply, wonderfully obsessed with this and do it every night before bed, and they like kind of have resolutions to do a few menus every night, and they just put Game of Thrones on and just do it, and it's and it's just God bless them. So it's fantastic, and we know who these people are kind of informally just through email and Twitter. We don't have a formal account system. We'd like to. We don't want to require it. We like how the barrier is low, and we really respect user privacy. And if you don't want to tell us anything about yourself, that's fine. But we'd like to offer more capabilities to kind of upgrade people's experience. If they want to get more involved, and we get emails about that, give me more to do, give me more to do. We'd like to give them kind of like an expert status and recognize them and give have some leaderboards, basic things like that. Part of the reason we've waited is because there's some big kind of infrastructure happening at the library, single account systems, stuff like that we're waiting on that's not in our group. So we're kind of waiting to hook these things into that. But that's sort of where we are right now with it. We also are really trying to model, how do you create a new data resource? I showed you with the maps. The data is all exportable. You can visualize it in sort of popular tools like Google Earth. All the data here is open and free to be played with. You can download a biweekly export just in spreadsheets. We also created the library's first. It's not technically the first API the library's had, and an API is a applications programming interface. And what it really means is it's basically a standardized set of ways to interact for a programmer to interact with our software and with the data. Analogy I sometimes use is, imagine, it's sort of like an electrical socket. Instead of having to put in a new lamp, instead of having to break a hole in the wall and kind of like really get into the wiring, we have a standardized socket. If you can plug things that are socket shaped into it, any appliance you want. So people can build any kind of appliance with this data. If they want to build a historical menu search thing, or kind of a historical food pages thing, they could just pull this data into that. If they wanted to kind of create an interactive detective novel where where the character was kind of hopping to different lunchrooms, they could pull that. I mean, who knows? We're not, again, libraries always tried to collect things and make resources available for, we don't necessarily know what purposes, and that's what we're here for. So this is the way of doing that in kind of the internet medium. And so the API is the library's first publicly promoted and well-documented API. I can definitely claim that. And we have an API for the digital gallery that's kind of secret and just for like kind of institutional collaborations. So there's that, and that's all documented on GitHub, and it's been getting some attention. We launched the API in June, or it might have been early July, and the kind of food tech community, food startups, and other kind of interesting kind of data nerds are finding it and requesting tokens and kind of starting to play around with it. We haven't seen anything big come from it yet, but there's definitely some interest, and we'd like to get some help cleaning the data and so on and so forth. There was a great story over the summer, Planet Money and NPR, that it wasn't so much using the API, but it was definitely consulting the data, where they were looking at the price of filet mignon at Delmonico's over a few different periods. And this gave me an insight into how the menus data might really actually be interesting is in conjunction with other data. Because they were correlating it with Bureau of Labor Statistics kind of stuff and trying to put together a picture of why did the price go up in the 80s and then go down, and looking at the price of different kind of commodities and labor and kind of other data. And it was an interesting barometer of a moment in social and economic history. And so that was a nice kind of clue into what this might be interesting for. But bottom line, we're trying to just model how to go deep with the collection. Whether the menus data ends up kind of changing the world or not, we just wanted to kind of use this as an interesting experiment, how deep you can potentially go. And so that's all there. We're getting close to the 3D glasses moment. Not yet, though. This next project completes this little trilogy of projects that were based on material that was already available digitally. So it was this "so now what" question. Like, how do we actually make this part of the internet in an interesting way? And this was rather different than the maps or the menus, less data-oriented. But we have this amazing collection of stereographs. These are photographs. They look like identical pairs, but they're actually two images of the same thing taken from slightly different angles. And they were kind of old school 3D technology, 3D entertainment, or 3D kind of virtual sightseeing. This was like virtual reality of its time. And they were very, very popular. We have over 40,000 of them online, well, at least double that in the collections, but maybe probably triple in different collections. And these were viewed with a stereoscope. So you put it in this thing, and you get it at the right distance, and the two images is just basically using what your eyes do at every moment by resolving the two images they see into a 3D image that has depth, because you're slightly seeing around the objects. It creates that effect in an image that you're looking into, and you kind of feel like you're falling into it. It's really spectacular technology, actually, and they're really wonderful. And we've digitized over 40,000 and put them online, which is great. But unless you kind of sit back and cross your eyes and do some weird stuff, you're not going to get that 3D kind of experience that they're meant for. So we were wondering, how could we do something? Actually, the idea came to us. These are just some of the other kind of the history of this kind of the 3D stereograph. We actually got the idea from a user. This guy out in San Francisco, Josh Heineman, has a Tumblr. And for a couple of years, just sort of on an occasional basis, he'd been downloading individual stereographs from our digital gallery, going into Photoshop, chopping them in half, cropping them, and then creating little animated GIFs, which are essentially just looping animations, just toggling between the two images. And he got them in just the right spot, and they became these like little cinema fragments. They're just really amazing. And you don't need glasses. You can view them unassisted on a computer screen and get a kind of an interesting version of that 3D effect. And I particularly love this because it's such a cool mashup in that it's sort of taking kind of a vintage photographic form and a vintage internet form, because animated GIFs are kind of like old school multimedia. The earliest home pages, the way people would dress them up and kind of give them a little pizzazz, or like little twinkling unicorns, or they'd say, the idea that things, going back to the idea of blogs and writing that's always kind of never finished, that is always evolving. This idea of things being under construction, like always under construction, and you'd see little GIFs of a construction worker just endlessly digging, or just kind of piling into the concrete, and cement mixers and all these goofy little animations. They're just strings of images that would loop infinitely. They're just dead stupid and simple, and they work. And that's the form he's using, and I just think that's a wonderful kind of mashup of forms. So anyway. Once our team started getting together, and I should add, all this, the Map Warper predates the formal group of labs. It was built by this external group, and we now manage the project and are building new aspects of it. But everything else I'm showing you was pretty much in the last year and a half. We've been doing a lot of work. The team's new. We've only had a real staff for a year. And so a lot's been happening. So when the team started getting together, I had pointed to this, and I had always referenced this as like just a great example of what can happen when you put collections out there. You put them out there for free. People can remix them, do fun stuff with them. It's like it kind of really kind of puts you back in touch with what a library is for, but in the internet. So I'd often point to this example as, a lovely illustration of that. I said, but what if we could do it in the browser? Just anyone could do it. They don't have to download anything. They don't have to have any kind of Photoshop skills. They could just do it right in the browser, instantly create the new version, and share it. And it could become this kind of creation mill around this collection. So one of our brilliant hackers started just playing around with an interaction concept. And this is the first interaction concept, and when we realized, oh, this actually could work. And the way it works is, and this is how the stereo Grandimator was born, and this will just walk you through some of it. So, you enter the site, you enter the kind of create mode, and you get a random selection of 9. You can refresh that list or choose one of those, or you can even do a little search. So he's searching bicycle here. And you get some, because we're looking at the metadata that was in the digital gallery, so we have some descriptions of these images. You choose one, and then it goes into this create screen. And as soon as the user clicks it, you get a live preview to the right. And what it is you're just adjusting the parallax, or the difference between left and right. And you can move the whole thing, because sometimes every card is a little different. Sometimes the center point's different, and then you just sort of adjust it. And he's just switched on Anaglyph mode, which is the 3D Anaglyph, which you need glasses for. But we'll come to the glasses in just a second. We also added a rotate mode, because some of them were taken out of not totally vertically aligned, and you would get a much more spastic kind of animation than you would if it was nicely aligned. So we have some tools there to really finesse it. And he's going to bring it back into animation mode, and then you can adjust a speed dial. If you want your seizure to be milder, you can dial that down, and then yeah. Some people this definitely doesn't work for everyone. Some people are like, but some people are just insanely excited about this. So it's not nothing's for everyone. I wonder what the overlap of the menu users in this is. Probably not a lot. So anyway, see, he's kind of getting it perfect, and then you hit the save, and you have a new page created with that artifact, a bunch of social media share buttons and blah, 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 embed code. You can go back and make another version of it if you did the animation but want to go back and do the Anaglyph. And they're all in a gallery. Here we go. And so that's the new creation that a user has just made. And you can view everything in the gallery. This screencast was taken before we made an update to the site, where we actually incorporated images from the Boston Public Library, about 600, between 600 and 700, and you can sort by collection, and they all link back to the original record page. So we were trying to model in a lightweight way, how you could one library could build a tool, and then have lots of different library collections kind of participate in it. We were able to do that very easily because they have their BPL host their images on Flickr. So Flickr has a great API, and again, getting back to this electrical socket idea and plugging in different appliances, they've made it so easy to plug appliances into Flickr that people make all kinds of cool stuff with Flickr photos. And I see that as kind of like a wonderful sketch of what if research libraries or public libraries had that kind of infrastructure, so we could just start building tools that pulled content from all over the place. So this is the gallery. It's not in motion anymore. And then here's some spotlighting a couple of great creations. And I love them. I think they're really kind of entrancing.
And users can then download this if they want.
Oh yeah, you could just download the GIF, and yeah. And we make it easy to embed. There's a little embed code you can throw in a blog, and yeah. So they're really fun. And there's not everyone does it well. Like, we're not requiring that it's a certain. We're not insisting that it's a certain level of quality in order to be included. People can make a mess. We don't enforce anything. And there was a blog that even curated interesting failures of the Stereograndometer. A Stereograndometer Gone Wrong, it was called. And I love that because, yeah, obviously I prefer the other ones, those exquisitely balanced kind of ones where the whole world is pulsing around this subject, or the object, rather. I love that we're just letting people make a mess, and there's really nothing wrong with it. We can be, it's sort of making the point that we can be more promiscuous with collections. Once you digitize them, you can let people do what they will with them. And so I think that's a kind of a lovely thing about the project. Now, so this is just a quick illustration of the Anaglyph mode, which is pretty fun. All right, it's a lot of build-up. This is not going to be that amazing, but they're really lovely. But they really work. I mean, this is just to give you a sense. It works. These different methodologies of giving you 3D sensation can traverse formats and viewing mechanisms. So it's nice that these photographs were taken, published by popular companies that would distribute these cards by the hundreds, thousands, millions. We then digitized them. We then built tools. Users then created 3D images that work with these things on the internet in this room. It's just a wonderful journey that these collections have taken. So, okay, you may take them off now. So anyway, that's the Stereograndometer, and this really was kind of, unlike the other projects, really a hit it had like kind of a viral media moment where it really kind of exploded, like just really crushed other kind of traffic records we'd had for like online exhibitions and stuff for a few days. And we were looking at live analytics on Google, which is kind of addictive when you've launched a site. And there were like at one point there were like over 500 people right at that moment on the site, and that was really cool. And at 1 a.m. And we're like, what is going on? And then this is right after we launched it, and then we realized that Felicia Day, who was in God, what was she? Was she in Xena or no? God, I'm showing that Anyway, she was Buffy. She may have been Buffy. Anyway, I'm not obviously a huge fan, but many people are. Many people are. Many people are fans of Felicia Day, and she kind of just said, "Oh my God, look at this thing." And so that we kind of ventured into a different kind of internet culture, which was really great. A thing about this project, and going back to the idea that, and this being kind of the interesting exception with our projects that are all so curator inspired and really collaborations with curators. This was this user inspired thing. So we invited him to initially just to like, hey, you want to like blurb this or to kind of make a little note? We want to definitely acknowledge you and completely. And he was so thrilled. He wrote this essay. And fortunately, he's a good writer, and it all worked out well. And we posted that, and that was reprinted, kind of an expanded form in the Huffington Post. And we, he got interviewed a bunch of times. It was really a lovely thing, and a lovely way to kind of model how sometimes creative reuse of the collections can inspire a new service. But in some ways, what we're trying to imply with this is that when the library finally gets its infrastructure, when we finally get those electrical sockets kind of arrayed around the library, so to speak, people could build this kind of thing themselves. So in some ways, we're modeling something that it's not, the expectation is not that, oh, library will build lots of these things necessarily, but if we put our data out there and really publicize it and maybe have kind of convenings, like hackathons, they're code camps, or kind of maybe offer prizes for the most creative application, what the MTA has done with its data, we could potentially have these things happen without us doing any work at all, except by making things accessible. So that would be interesting. That code is available if you want to play around with that at all. Oh, if anyone's jotting that down. We can look at that later if you need to go back. Okay, final in-depth profile of a project. This is rather different. This is kind of going beyond that trilogy of stuff we already had, where we could go deeper. This was kind of a different thing, where we'd been talking to folks in our local history, genealogy, and U.S. history division. That's all one division. Just brainstorming project ideas, and they were telling us about, this is back in the summer of 2011, and they were saying, well, a big thing coming down the pike for us is April 2nd, 2012, the National Archives will release the 1940s federal census records. Every 10 years a census is taken, and the data comes out not too long after that, but the records that are, that the census takers went door to door with all over the country and jotted down all this information through these direct interviews, that is kept under lock and key for statutory privacy reasons, something like that, for 72 years. So every 10 years on the twos, I guess, a new set of documents for a new decade is released. And 1940 is especially interesting. I mean, it's a really transitional moment for the country coming out of the Great Depression, going into World War II. A lot of migration had happened. The country was very different than it had been in 1930. And it's just an amazing trove of information, especially for people doing family history research, want to know where they came from. This is just something funny, I thought. No census, no feeling. Anyway, there's an obscure Three Stooges short about the census, which I thought was fun. But anyway, that was just an indulgence. So on April 2nd of this year, they released the 1940 census records. It was the first time they put them all up online. They were getting ready to do this, and they had actually a rough launch. They didn't expect the 23 million hits or something they got the first day, and the site crashed and wasn't functioning. But they got it together, and it's going well now. This is at the National Archives. And is nearly 4 million images. So that's what we were expecting to come online at the National Archives. So we were learning from our folks, and just to give you a sense, this isn't just some obscure event. People were gearing up for this. This was, this was like the Harry Potter release date for genealogists. They were like just readying, clipping on their gear, just getting ready, really ready to go. And there were countdown widgets and all kinds of stuff. And we learned, because we soon understood the depths of madness, wonderful madness of this community. This lady was ready. And So yay, it's all coming out, but there's a problem, and this is what our folks explained to us. The problem is that when the census was released, this is actually not the case now, it's since been indexed, but it wasn't indexed. So nearly 4 million images, all these documents, tons of data, just opaque, right? And there's no clear classification system where you can be like, well, I'll just go to this neighborhood and I'll just look through it. It's not classified that way. It's very obscure using these strange enumeration district things that the census used. So, what the hell, so it's hallelujah, this stuff has been released, but what do you do with it? It's like this big needle in a haystack problem, is the metaphor we often use for this. So our wonderful, this is an amazing staff in this department. Myra Liriano at the top is the head of the Milstein division, and these are a few of her just amazingly knowledgeable staff. Philip Sutton, Sachi Clayton, and Carmen Nigro, and they're just amazingly knowledgeable and inspiring people to work with. And they explained to us that, well, there are ways. They're kind of complicated, but there are ways to drill in. If you have a name, you can, or an address, there are tools to transform that into a district and then get to a local stack of census pages, which then you'll have to kind of go through and look with your eyeballs for that name. But you can make the haystack the size of a city block maybe instead of a country. And this is that tool. It's by these genealogists out in San Francisco who built this very popular resource. I have to say, I don't know why they call it one step, because it takes so many more steps than that. But I just think that's funny. But anyway, it's a great resource. So, but what if you don't have an address? That was the thing, okay, but do you happen to know your great-grandmother's address from 1940? Maybe you do. Maybe you have letters. Maybe you have ways that you know that, but you might not know that. So he said, so what do you do then? And they said, well, we would send them to the old phone books, which these are not our phone books. But just, phone books, again, one of these other things that are not typically saved, but the library has saved them. God bless the library. It's amazing. We have phone books from, like, Stockholm in the 70s, just weird stuff. And we have a very comprehensive set of phone books from New York City and city directories going back pre-telephone era. And like the data I was showing you on the map when it was all those pins were popping up. And a lot of the originals have been thrown out after they were microfilmed because they were just disintegrating, not made to be long lasting. But we have these phone books. So we were thinking, so they said, okay, so if they didn't have an address, you'd send them to the microfilm room. They bring up a reel of old phone books. They'd look for a name, get the address, and then they go to this, they get the microfilm, and then they get the address, go to this site, and then they go to the National Archives site, and they'd hopefully find this name in the documents. So we're like, okay, how can we compress that workflow? How can we make that into an elegant, simplified experience, starting with digitizing those phone books from the microfilm? So that's what we did. So this is kind of different in that this is an experiment in kind of a quick resource mobilization to solve this kind of very immediate, very time-bound need. And it all started with the phone books. This is using as an illustration the library used to have live-in superintendents who had whole families who had apartments that lived full-time in the library. And this is John Fedler, and this is just an illustration of the kind of workflow that, this is the guy you're looking for, you find him in a phone book, you find his census record, and and then you know everything you want to know. So you choose a phone book. So this is the Manhattan directory. The OCR output for these is terrible, so we just index the name ranges, so it just works like a phone book. You scroll down to the name range you want. You find something, maybe someone famous, like J.D. Salinger, who we found. Like a lot of famous people were found. It was really interesting. You type that, and it consults that database, the one-step database, where we worked with them and got their data, and they were really great. And this is basically consulting that data set right from the phone book, so you don't have to go somewhere else. We've kind of pulled the tool, all the data to you. And that'll create, on the fly, a new kind of search receipt, like a results page, that has the name, has that bit of the phone book that you kind of, metaphorically ripped out on your kind of quest, the phone dangling from the cord, running down the street with your information. And then you have these two reference maps, old 1940 era-ish, U.S. Geological Survey topographic map. We're limited what we can do because of copyright after 1923, but we got those from the USGS. They're great. Contemporary map for reference. You then use the kind of the one-step tools. You take many one-steps, and you do cross streets and back streets, and you can narrow that down to sometimes one or sometimes just a couple of numbers, and then those link to the census, to the National Archives site. We added some other features. You could post a story, a little annotation. And this actually ended up being used most by our staff, who would annotate these kind of interesting findings from the phone book. So J.D. Salinger hiding in plain sight in the Upper East Side, famous recluse, he's right there in the phone book. It's pretty amazing. And these latest searches, all the searches would be mapped. You'd see the 50 latest here. You could go back into them, and there'd be a feed of the latest stories that were appended to these searches. And we just found some amazing people, hiding in plain sight in the phone book. Billie Holiday, parents of, this is Christopher Walken's dad's bakery in Queens. Isaac Asimov, this is right near where I live in Brooklyn, the Asimov candy store in Windsor Terrace. Jonas Salk, polio vaccine, great artists. And these were all displayed on the front page. The headline ticker too, if you're seeing this site live, that's moving like a little stock ticker. That line, news for 1940. We work with the New York Times R&D lab, so this is also a cool excuse for us to collaborate with another kind of tech shop. They have an amazing R&D lab at the New York Times, and we told them about this project. They were excited, and they built us a little feed of 1940s headlines from their database. And so whatever day you are on this site, if you're here today, you'll see October 12th, 1940. Here are the headlines of that day. And it's cool. This screen grab was a week or two ago. A lot of election coverage, Wendell Willkie. And you can click that. And we're also trying to model how do you, when you're getting on-site service at the library, some of the people I showed in those pictures, you get amazing service. They will bring resources you didn't even know existed to you to kind of create a bigger, create a picture, to provide context, provide other things, sometimes things that we have, sometimes things that they'll reference you to elsewhere. That's an amazing kind of service that you get on site. We were trying to kind of approach that on this website. So let's bring other resources that you might find interesting. So the library pays a lot of money to subscribe to databases that provide access to old news archives, et cetera. So we linked those articles to our ProQuest database. So when you're on site at the library, you could click that headline, go right to its search in ProQuest and get the article. And if you're outside our IP range, and this would work on all the branches, not just the research libraries, if you were outside, though, any of the libraries, you would just go to the New York Times site, and if you have a subscription, you could get the same thing. But we were trying to show, we're connecting the dots here. And this is our favorite little piece of press coverage. This got a lot of attention right around that time in the kind of census frenzy. But this is our favorite one, just because it was sort of illustrating the kind of wonderful kind of thrills that you could get from these old kind of forgotten documents. So that's sort of a tour through the kind of the big work lately. Up next, just to give you a glimpse at some of the stuff some materials and issues we're looking at now. We've done a lot of collection kind of deep dives into like a specific collection. We're going to continue to do some of that. We're also being now entrusted with kind of modernizing access to larger categories of material. Like, where's the digital gallery going next? We haven't yet been asked to do that, but we've been asked to kind of build out access to new types of material that are being digitized that don't fit into the digital gallery, like archives and old archival video. We're playing with some ideas of how to go, the data mashup I showed you with old black residents of New York on the map of the period. We're trying to think about how we can, and the Gazetteer project, how we can kind of get users help in correcting, geolocations and showing where that actually was at that time and saving that data, or just turning it into games that maybe younger people, maybe students could play and sort of get to know these kinds of materials and also maybe help us sift some data in the process. So this is just a mock-up, which it's not, the app is not going to end up being this, but it just shows you some of the early drafts we go through, where you get an old city directory from the Internet Archive in this case. You type in the name, it's kind of like the DirectMe site, and their profession, you add to the map, but instead of adding to a Google map, you're adding to a geo-rectified map layer. So we've taken a resource from the map Borbor, now putting it in a new context, a new application, a new appliance. And the idea here is that you see where it's pinned, and you see the actual address of the map, and you can move it to where it actually belongs. And sometimes it's a big difference, sometimes it's not. And we can save that. You submit the location, and we're kind of repopulating historical New York with people from that time on a map of that time. So that's kind of an idea there we're calling like Ghost Map or something like that. Other kind of ephemeral documents like old theater playbills. I just sent yesterday these 5 reels of microfilm out to a vendor, because we don't digitize microfilm in-house, to get digitized as a sort of a test batch to build another kind of community transcription project around old theater, dance, and music programs. Library has maybe, I want to say like 1.5+ million. Amazing. They're not even cataloged. And they're not in very good condition because they're just on kind of acid paper. we'd like to build, kind of imagine like an IMDb for like historical performance. Get the names and the roles and the dates and the venues and build a really great data set. So that's something we're starting to investigate. Building really, this is just a mock-up kind of concept for new ways for users to interact with archival video content. This is just like a dummy video from YouTube that's a placeholder for dance collections that we're actually going to be working with. And this is an idea of like annotating along a timeline or doing kind of juxtaposition. So you can show, we have videos of dance documentation that are of the same performance but from different camera angles. So maybe you want to cue something at a certain time and show a juxtaposition, allowing users or curators to do that. Maybe doing mashups, stacking them up. So we're playing with some early ideas about how to deal with archival video. These are some sketches toward, we're trying to build we're working right now on a new interface to our archival finding aids. These are documents that archivists produce when they process a collection to organize it into folders and boxes and essentially provide you with a roadmap to that collection. Usually it doesn't go down to the item level, it just shows you categories of material. It's a really hard document to represent online in a good way because it's really long and we don't know what they're looking for, and how to actually make that convenient and fluid is tricky, and we haven't seen anyone really nail it yet, so we're going to try and nail it. And the beta of this will go live around New Year's, but it'll be iterating, so this is not even a designed little glimpse at something that we're playing with there, of like emulating the Mac Finder window where you have hierarchies of menus and stuff. So we're playing with some ideas. Other data sets the library has produced. This is a spreadsheet of over 85,000 lines of photographers' identities that a guy in our photo division has been toiling on for years. And we said, first of all, let us migrate that and save it so it doesn't crash and die. And second of all, this could become like the leading kind of bibliographic authority for photographers of its kind. So we're playing around with what we can do with that. That might come out in the next year, we're going to see. And then this is a really just a sketch of the idea of bringing these kind of crowdsourcing, kind of public participation projects into one fold. Because right now we've kind of put out these pilots and they show what's possible potentially, but we have to build up an audience for each one. And fortunately we're pretty good at sort of marketing projects and kind of doing the full promotional kind of song and dance for each project, but it's a lot of work. And it's a shame that the digital gallery, when you go to the stereographs or menus or maps, there is no indication on those item pages that those projects are going on. It's just a sad thing. Like many organizations, we have a lot of fragmentation. Departments trying to work together, it's hard. But we're undergoing some big kind of revamps of our online presence, and something we're aiming to do is kind of bring these activities under one roof, maybe tie them into user accounts so you can sort of get a sense of the overall collective effort that's going on, and maybe get some more recognition for if you do end up putting a lot of time into it. So this is just a kind of a gesture at like, it won't look like this, but what that could feel like. Here it all is, and that's sort of what the Zooniverse does, or what the National Archives is now doing with its Citizen Archivist dashboard, where it just gives you very prominently, here are all these ways that you can help. So that's something, I think, a next step. And lastly, I'm just going to plug 2 events that are coming up. Next Tuesday, we also host conversations in the kind of digital humanities and other areas. And this is, I'm really excited about this one. That actually, when it's on a web page, is a little GIF that's moving. We love the GIFs. Next Tuesday evening at 6, these are all free events at the main library. Ben Vershbow, who is the digital conservator, he's a very dashing guy. He's fantastically smart. He's wonderful. He works at Rhizome, which is housed at the New Museum, and he is a specialist at preserving digital artworks. And he's also just a really smart, interesting guy, and is going to be talking about, how do you save the web? Sort of the future of our digital past. And these are, I think, the big questions that face libraries. How do you remember, digital culture? We don't really know. We're barely kind of asking that question right now. We have one digital archivist at the library. We probably should have like a whole building full of them. But he's doing some amazing work. There's forensic techniques for extracting media from obsolete drives, and we're processing but our archivists are processing the Timothy Leary papers right now, which is amazing. In addition to finding some illicit substances, they have found there's a lot of born digital material, what we call born digital. So, old floppy disks and computer games that he built, that he coded. And how do you mount those? How do you make those accessible in today's technology? They don't run on anything we have now. So we have an amazing digital archivist named Don Menerick who's extracting these, has all kinds of techniques for kind of forensically kind of extracting stuff. and Ben will be talking about a lot of the same stuff. So these are real future of the library questions. We're not working on anything specifically like that, unfortunately, now. We're looking at what we already have and how to make that part of the internet. But our contribution to this is, our humble contribution is just trying to host really smart people in talks who talk about this issue. So we've had a number of talks on these kind of themes. And I've mentioned the Zooniverse a few times, November 7th, in the middle of the day, so lunch break, if you can make it, it'd be great. We're gonna have the ringmaster, the master of the Zooniverse, Chris Lintott, who's an astrophysicist and incredibly charismatic guy, talking about this whole effort, and he has great stories to tell. And this makes like our menus project look kind of Bush League. I mean, this is heavy duty, massively scaled stuff. It's really cool citizen science stuff. So that's gonna be great. So these are really great talks, all free. Definitely check them out.
Do they eventually go online as well?
We endeavor, this is all something we kind of do as a spare, in our spare time. We endeavor to kind of record them. We sometimes throw them up in the Internet Archive because it's quicker. Yeah, we try. We've gotten a bunch of them up, so I can't guarantee it, but we will try. So thank you.